Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl, and this is week one of several shows recorded live during Forever Lager, a festival held by Notch Brewing in Brighton, Massachusetts. In a minute, you're going to hear about the past, present, and future of lager from three respected brewers. First, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There, you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. You can also follow All About Beer on Instagram, Threads, X, and Facebook at All About Beer. And to keep up with all of the smoked beer news and releases, check out This Week in Rauk Beer by searching the group on Facebook or follow at TW Rauk Beer on X Threads and Instagram. Glassware and apparel is available on allaboutbeer.com/merch. This show and all of the work we do, it's supported by you. Please go visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer. A few dollars goes a long way to help keep the content fresh and to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show or any of our shows, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. Forever Lager was held last weekend. It was this great event hosted by Notch Brewing, and this panel from Green Bench Brewing, Berwick Brewing, and Otherlands Brewing kicked off the first of four discussions held during the two tastings. I'll introduce the panel, and then we'll get into the conversation. All right, I am John Holl. I'm the editor of All About Beer, and this is the panel entitled Past, Present, and Future of Lagers, and I'm thrilled to be joined by a trio of distinguished brewers who know a thing or two about lagers, both past, present, and maybe future. We're going to find out. We'll get a crystal ball going in a few minutes. But first, let me introduce this panel to you. Tom Clark is the owner of Berwick Brewing in Pennsylvania, where he focuses on German-style lagers. He began as a brewing apprentice at New Amsterdam Brewing before launching a homebrew supply business in Red Bank, New Jersey, which later became Red Bank Brewing Company. And later he worked as a brewer in Germany and as an assistant brewmaster at the Minnesota Brewing Company. He has also worked as a brewery consultant. That's Tom, everybody. Ben Howe is the co-founder and brewer of Otherlands Beer in Bellingham, Washington. He started brewing professionally in 2007 after landing a gig washing, filling, and delivering kegs at Cambridge Brewing Company, which I imagine some of you have heard. After 4 years learning under Will Myers and Megan Parisi, he was arrogant enough to open Enlightenment Ales in Lowell, Massachusetts in 2012, a project that focused on beer to champagne and farmhouse ales. 2014, he partnered up with Idle Hands, producing both brands in Everett, and in 2015 accepted a job as a head brewer in rural Denmark. How do you pronounce the brewery in Denmark?
I don't know either. You know?
Okay, it's in your bio, and you just...
Abeltoft something.
Okay, that's perfect.
Abeltoft, I got
He then interned at two small breweries in Franconia and northern France. He returned to the U.S. in 2017, worked under Kevin Davey at Wayfinder Beer in Portland, and finally opened Otherlands Beer in Bellingham with his wife in 2020, right at the beginning of the gosh darn pandemic. And I have to switch here, Khris Johnson of Green Bench. He's the head brewer and co-owner of Green Bench Brewing Company in Florida, which is also part of Web City Cellar. He is an industry professional for over 14 years. He's also a founding faculty member at the USF St. Petersburg Brewing Arts Program, the vice president of beer culture, a board member of the Michael James Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling, and a founding board member of the National Black Brewers Association of America. That's it. We're out of time. Thanks, everybody, for coming. All right, so we're here at Forever Lager, and quick question for all three of you. What is the best style of beer, and why is it a double hazy New England IPA? All right. I thought that'd be funnier.
We are laughing.
That's at me. Not with me. Tom, I want to start with you. You've been doing this for a while, and I know you have a great appreciation of lager. You brought old brewing logs of America's brewing history as well. But from the time that you first started brewing professionally to now, what have you seen as the trajectory of, let's say, small batch lager, or lager produced by smaller producers, maybe not even only in the U.S., but around the world?
Around the world.
Well, let's focus on the U.S. first, and
sure.
then
Well,
and here, get the mic closer.
I think that people, they have seen that the IPA part of the whole segment.
Yeah.
is
right there. Right there.
Right in my mouth.
Yes. If it looks
Right in my
uncomfortable,
mouth.
then that's where you need to be. Yeah.
Anyway, these guys, that are making, what is it called? Hazy IPAs? Which, by the way, we make one and we call it Fad Chaser. But anyway, they're certainly seeing a decline, in my opinion.
Okay.
And they're seeing that the lager beer segment is the latest, I don't want to use that word fad, but, we're coming back around again.
So when you first started, though, how were small batch lagers perceived?
The first brewery I worked at in 1986 was lager beer. So they happened to be brewing 100-barrel batches. So it was fairly large at that time. They were ahead of their game, because amber ales were coming out everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the world got taken over by ales because it's fast, easy, down and dirty. And lagers take a much longer time.
Yeah. Khris, when I think about hot weather, lager comes up a lot as, it's refreshing, it's a lawnmower beer. You being a Florida brewer, when you were getting ready to open up Green Bench, how important was it from the beginning that you had a lager program?
Not at all, actually. When we first opened, we weren't making lagers at all. When I got into beer, it was like kind of the mid-2000s. I was in college. I became a home brewer. And there was a brewery that opened up recently, or at that time, called Cigar City. Uh-huh. And I started working there pretty early on, but we weren't making lagers there either. Like, no one was making lager. Actually,
right.
The state of craft where I was if you made lagers, you kind of got made fun of. It was kind of like, why would you make lager at all? Like, we're making beer to make something that you can't find at a grocery store. We're making these, these IPAs, these aggressive imperial stouts, these things that you can't find. Like, why? And also, why would I make a lager when I could make 3 times as many IPAs in the same amount of time? It just didn't make any sense. And frankly, the drinkers at the time were drinking craft as a kind of a rebellion against sort of the macro lager anyway. And so, like, that was the state of lager as it is. So by the time we opened the brewery in 2013, first things first, I wasn't trained to make lager, so I didn't even know how the hell to make lager because no one taught me.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't going to do that. We're making IPAs to start with and like Saison, farmhouse ale, kind of mixed culture beers. And then but I knew one day I wanted to make a lager. I just didn't know what it needed to be because no one around me was really making them at all.
Yeah. So I guess I want to get back to then Florida in just a minute, but Ben, I want to bring you into this conversation then because Khris is saying when he first started, not necessarily trained to make lagers, and it's something where I think in the beginning days of craft, I'm painting with a broad brush, but ales were seen as fairly safe. You could hide some flaws in those very early days. Lager, you have nothing to. There's nowhere to hide. For you as a brewer. You had all of this experience at various breweries, but then when you started doing stints in Germany, when you started doing stints overseas, did that change your appreciation for making some of these styles?
Yes. In terms of how they're made and what really changed my mind. So working over in Europe, the place that I ended up working at, I got there and I was like, I'm so excited. I'm in Europe. I'm going to learn more about making European beers, and they said no, and they're wonderful people. They said, we make a lot of American beer here, and you're an American brewer, like make us American IPA.
Sure.
And I had a lot of freedom to experiment and learn and try to kind of change the way I was making IPA, and got to travel and have just like super easy drinking, but also really complex beers in different places in Europe. I went on this trip where we were in Bavaria for a couple of days and just, had this like filtered, classic, beautiful, like Southern Bavarian beer. And I thought it was the best lager I'd ever had. And then a friend of mine was like, hey, like you're driving through, you need to stop outside of Bamberg and like go to some of these little country breweries. And had beer there, and that was the revelation. I was like, what? Like people are making beers. They reminded me of farmhouse ales in the way that they are just like outside the lines. They're expressive. They're made in small ways, but they have like huge character. And don't get me wrong, like the beers in Munich were incredible, and I love them too. But having the beers in Franconia, I was like, people are making beers that are super easy drinking. You can drink this one beer all day long, but they're also really characterful in a way that found like the picture of lager in my head wasn't. And
Yeah.
So for me, I was like, yes, this is something that is both really interesting, and I think these are the most interesting beers that I can try to make.
Yeah. Tom, over your career, I imagine education and continuously learning and experimentation while also honoring tradition comes into play. And when you see a room like this that is filled with brewers who have really dedicated themselves to a proper lager program, does it give you hope for like honoring the past and then the future of lager? Like, how important is, I guess, one, education to the evolution of beer altogether, but then, two, what it means from your perspective of where we're at right now?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really important that the tradition gets carried on in the proper way. So, making lager beers with Citra or Mosaic hops is not, in my opinion, a good way to make lager beers.
Okay.
It should be traditional as far as the hopping goes. It should be traditional as far as the process goes. It's important to know that, true lager beer should be mashed in a step mash and things like that, where ales are just one step infusion mash. Doesn't really make good lager beer, in my opinion. But
Where do you guys stand on only sticking to tradition, only sticking with traditional hops versus some of the more modern? Because I haven't looked at this full list, but I'm going to imagine that there's Citra and Mosaic somewhere in this room right now.
most likely.
Well, I think there's plenty of breweries making really good beers that way, but I have this idea that like there's different mountaintops that we're trying to get to. It's not like there's many different ways to mountaintop. There's many different mountaintops, and to me, the beers that I like most in the world, and the ones that I'm trying to make, are from a very traditional approach because I really like the way those beers taste. And there's some people, using Citra and Mosaic to make lagers. They don't interest me as much. Those aren't necessarily the beers that I want to drink, and so they're not the beers I want to make. And the ones that I want to make, well, we use a lot of Herzbrucker, we use a lot of Perla, and we use a lot of Zatz. So,
Khris, I see you nodding along.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree completely with what he's saying. I mean, I'd say, first things first, there are people, like he said, making great beer that way and making great beer with Citra and Mosaic. And let's not kid ourselves, Citra and Mosaic is delicious. Like, I mean, it's a cheat code. It makes delicious flavors. Like, that's fine. And at the end of the day, like, being traditional is a beautiful thing, but the most important thing is making something that's delicious. Like, that's actually the most important thing. So, do I prefer a traditional lager? Absolutely. And do I find it more challenging? Absolutely. Do I feel like I'm more of a student of this if I'm doing that and exploring traditional styles? Yes. And to me, that's more exciting. To me, that's more fulfilling. And I prefer drinking them. And I think that the nuances of them can be so varied. I mean, he mentioned Franconian beer, which can be like, and even in Bavaria, you can go in the countryside, if you will, of Germany and Bavaria as a whole. Can be all sorts of different things within this very small space of Hellas even, right? So exploring that is far more interesting to me than making like a ubiquitous sort of flavor that you get from Citra Mosaic. It may be tasty, but it's going to taste like Citra Mosaic, you know? And so I'm more fascinated in the tradition than I am. And honestly, it's a more challenging production.
When it comes then to honoring tradition and to making beers that taste like those regions, that taste like those breweries that have worked on them forever, how is evolution possible in beer? Because beer has changed over time. Scientific methods have gotten better, ingredients have become more efficient or dialed in or flavorful. How is it important to still honor tradition but then not get stuck? I don't know. Anybody want to jump in?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start it. I'm
Okay.
sure you guys will have something to say on this too, but it would be ridiculous for us to think that we're the end all. Like, the end game is us. Like, that just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, everything's going to continue to evolve. Frankly, things should be better than where it is right now at a certain point. Like, it should continue to progress, right? In 5 years, beer should be better. Just should be. Like,
Yes.
That's just how it works. Do I think that the beer made today is better probably than any time ever. I do. I think we're making better beer now than in the history of making beer.
Yes.
Does that, as a whole, does that mean that the traditions didn't work or don't work or shouldn't be followed or shouldn't be studied? No, because I think part of the reason we're making great beer as a whole is because all of us are sharing some of that knowledge in a way that we never have before. I mean, we live in a time where a friend of mine in this room could be in Bavaria right now, and I could see exactly what they're doing in real time.
Right.
And we can exchange information at a rate and at a volume that's never happened before. And so because that information is moving so quickly and so eagerly amongst people like us, we're making better products faster. It used to be a mystery because no one knew how to do it. Now everybody can learn. There aren't any barriers like that anymore. Or there are some, but they're quickly being diminished. So
Yeah.
I agree 100%. I mean, in the past, you'd go to a beer festival like this, and my God, there'd be a handful of beers that were undrinkable, and people were drinking them, and we're just shaking our head. But as a whole, recently, I've found out that there's vast majority of the beer are very, very well made, clean, which is, with lagers, there's no escaping. You got to be clean. The beer's got to be clean. If you want to do some intentional funky flavors, that's one thing. But if you're not doing your job and you're a dirty brewer and you're making bad beer, they're usually the ones that have the auctions.
Yeah, that's true. Ben, you were going to jump in, it looked like.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add. I just wonder. I see some things that have evolved extremely rapidly in beer. Like when I first started brewing, we dry hopped by putting flower hops inside fermenters or bright tanks and hung them there in baskets. And then one day, someone from Vermont came along and said, "Hey, try pouring pellets in the top and rousing it." And whoa! And when New England IPA, whatever we want to call it, caught on, I was really excited about it. I was like, I was having these beers from Vermont that I had never had anything that tasted like that. They had a softness, they had a brightness, they were just so beautiful. And really quickly, the industry pivoted in terms of what we were making and how we were making them. And that evolution, I'm not saying it wasn't a good thing, but it shocks me how quickly that happened in a new style. Like in America, styles develop in 10 years, 5 years. It just happens so fast. And I look at traditional styles that we're talking about here and we're making, and I don't necessarily see that type of evolution, right? How much has changed in making Helles? I mean, I guess maybe diacetyl levels are lower. I don't know, DMS levels are lower. There's been technological developments that have happened in other places that make it easier to make some of those things. But I don't know, has a lot changed in traditional lager brewing in an important way? At least the beers you guys want to make?
I would argue, yeah, it has. And I say that as I agree with what you're saying when in comparison to, say, the state of American beer or North American beer as we understand it in craft, right? Which is rapid, crazy, new thing, new all the time, right? I think the advancement of Helles is pretty different probably than when it was brewed 100 years ago. And I mean, if you look at even reading textbooks of, we talked about it a lot last night with a bunch of people here. If you're reading Kuntz, if you're reading Nazis, the stuff that the published works still come out. Not obviously from them, but there are still people writing papers about Helles, and we're still learning about lipids and malt and process that can change flavor profiles drastically to create what we understand as Helles, maybe more purely. And so while sure it's a simple thing, and yeah, they are, for all intents and purposes, they were always pale lagers, I do think the technology and the advancement in process is continuing to evolve in Helles a lot. And part of that's because Helles is so popular. The reason there's so much funding behind it evolving is because so many people drink it. Lager is still the most consumed beer style in the world. It has been forever, basically.
Tom, you brought brewing books from the past, at least. So does that track, have these beers changed? Have these beers evolved?
Most of these brewing books that I have are from large American breweries that did lager beers.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to see the recipes. There's adjuncts in them, but one of the things that people don't realize is that when you use corn grits, for example, you decocted it, you put it in a
do a cereal mash
with malt, and that's something that everybody is now exploring or trying to explore if they have the proper equipment to do that.
Yeah.
And so when you see these books and see these recipes, it's like, wow, this is this brewery did 5 million barrels of beer.
Well, and that's some crazy technological advancement. I mean, you're talking about an industrial revolution that part of it was funded by beer.
Yeah.
Like they built things to keep beer cold. Like refrigeration, like has a lot to thank beer for. Like it was funded by beer. Like,
yes.
It's like, so you're talking about a style of beer, a light lager, that has changed our lifestyle completely.
Have we moved on? You talk about some of the adjuncts. Have we moved on in the craft space from beating up on adjuncts?
I think so.
I make a adjunct beer. We call it a cream ale, but it's very, very popular. We use flake corn in it.
Yeah. So. I mean, I'm not asking you all, the three of you, to speak for an entire industry, but I mean, 10 years ago, it was, there's the I'm a craft brewer video, and it's like, I don't put rice in my beer, I don't put corn in my beer, and then Chris Loring was like, well, I'm going to put corn and rice in my beer, and screw you guys, and it was great, it was delicious, and now everybody's doing it. And I talked to Sean O'Sullivan from 21st Amendment, who's in that video, saying we don't do that, and now they make like a corn lager, and it's one of their best sellers. And he's like, yeah, we were precious back then. But I'm not asking you guys to speak for the entire industry, but like, what changed, do you think, as lager brewers, where suddenly this wasn't? Suddenly it was okay to be talking about adjuncts in the craft space.
I don't know if I would even just say it's a beer thing. I think the things that people want, what is fashionable, what people are interested in, is not necessarily cyclical, but it certainly goes in waves. Like everyone wears high-waisted mom jeans now, right? When I was in high school, everyone wanted low-cut jeans, and that was the thing that was cool. Like you do something for long enough, and then people don't like it anymore. The next generation doesn't want it. I don't know, like when we got into it, it was easy to beat up on beers that didn't have a lot of character. And then we made beers that had a lot of goddamn character, right? Like we put everything in them, and we had the IBU wars, and we triple dry hop things, and well, we got bored with it. And we got bored with it, and I think a lot of people also, you don't want to drink double IPAs when you're 35. Like, okay, you move to something else. And what's the other opposite end of the spectrum? Beers that are extremely subtle. And one way to make beers that are extremely subtle that I love making is making Helles. It's subtle, but it's flavorful, and all of the characters derive from getting it out of the malt and the yeast. But like other mountaintops, I also like making beers that are subtle in a different way. Okay, well, what's the most subtle? Okay, I'll use 30% rice. That's real subtle.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's a challenge, too. Like, I think it's just, you do the same thing all the time, you get kind of bored with it. If you drink the same thing all the time.
Tom, what do you see as the beauty and subtlety? The beauty and subtlety.
Of a Helles or just of a lager beer?
We can stay with Helles, or we can go into lager.
Our best selling beer is a Helles. So, we always do double batches of that when we brew it. We happen to be in Yuengling country, so we call it lager.
Sure.
And Yuengling lager rules in Northeast PA. By the way, they still use corn grits, and they still run a cooker. So that's a really very traditional brewery.
Yeah.
I think that people drinking 7 or 8% IPAs are counterproductive.
Well, Chris, I mean, you make 7 and 8% IPAs. But,
so do we.
Yeah. But subtlety, though, right? I mean, with your Pilsner, we were talking last night. Whenever I'm in Florida,
about your feet,
about my feet. Great. I'm just going to leave that there and let everybody who's at home trying to figure out now.
What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, where my OnlyFans for feet page is. It's easy to find. God.
Just derailing.
Just totally off the rails at this point. But you do mixed fermentation, you do IPAs, you do a lot of these beers where the ingredients are front and center and kind of hitting you hard. But then you're also making these pilsners and lager where subtlety is king. And so as a brewer who is doing both in a place where both is wanted by the consumer, what is it about the subtlety of lagers that appeals to you, like as a drinker?
Well, I mean, I think no matter what we make, the goal is drinkability, right? So even if it's an IPA, or a mixed culture beer, something sour, we're looking for a drinkability in all those things. And it is harder to find. It's hard to find something more drinkable than a Pilsner when it's 100 degrees outside, or a light lager for that matter when it's 100 degrees outside. I think subtlety to me helps the drinkability for someone like us in this room, or people like us, because the more I drink something that's subtle, the more interesting it stays. It's something that I can consume a lot of. And at the end of the day, I'm a drinker. I like to drink beer, and I don't like having one or two. I like having 8 or 9. I like to drink beer. I like the act of drinking beer. The worst part to me is the getting drunk part, but I love drinking all day long. And so if it's subtle, it remains interesting throughout that entire session, right? So by the third, fourth one, I'm still picking up on nuance, and I'm not sort of wrecked. My palate's not, I've already figured everything out about it. It's in my face. I taste it all. There's nothing really more to discover. So I find subtle characters to be just more drinkable in quantity.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what I'm kind of more interested in.
Yeah.
I want to sit at Augustiner Keller all day long and just drink Helles and Edelstoff.
So do I.
That's all I want to do. Yeah. I don't know why we're doing that right now. Why are we not doing that?
It's next year, Forever Lager at the Augustiner Keller. It's not a fest. It's just all of us sitting around drinking.
Exactly.
Take it on the road.
Ben, where are you looking for inspiration for the next beers that you're brewing? I mean, you've been all over the lager map. You honor tradition when you're doing it, but you also seem to have this curiosity about digging into the past, digging into flavors, getting things right, honoring authenticity.
So there's
a lot to unpack that.
Well, I posed this question kind of to these guys earlier. There are a couple beers in my career that I've been chasing forever, and one of them having Terrace Bulba for the first time.
Yeah,
I've been trying to make Terrace Bulba for 10 years, or not make Terrace Bulba, but make a beer that grabs you that way, and I've never gotten close. And then the place that I interned at outside Bamberg, their flagship beer, their house beer, lager beer, I've never had anything like it anywhere else, and I've spent years both homebrewing and then made a batch at Wayfinder, and then we've done 15 batches at Otherlands trying to not to clone that beer, not I want to make that exact same thing, but I want to capture what is so intrinsically interesting about that beer. And I don't know if there's a lot of other things that I don't necessarily want to, I'll make different styles that I haven't made yet. I want to make that. I want to grab it. I want to finally get the beer the beer that's in my head, I want that in the glass. And I feel like I get, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I feel like I'm closer than ever. And so that's what I find really interesting right now, is just trying to nail this thing. That and my Helles.
You know how when you get really close to something and then you feel like you're even further away?
Yes. Yes, very much so. Because then you see the distance, you get to the top of a mountain, you're like, the next mountains are way damn it. It feels good for a minute, but... Yeah.
Ben, you need cows. You need cows in your backyard. You really do.
My wife might object, but...
But I wonder, and not being a brewer, but I'm curious, you're citing other people's beers, right? And the way that they made you feel, kind of thing. I imagine that your beers have made people feel that way, all of you guys. And it might be tough if you're in the middle of it to have that out-of-body experience that you have drinking somebody else's beers with your own. I remember visiting your place in Bellingham 2 years ago, and I had to leave early to go, or leave sooner than I wanted to go to an event. But I walked out euphoric, just in the entire thing that you and Carolina had put together, of just, my God, this is incredible. Why do I have to go anywhere else now that I'm here in Bellingham right now? With no disrespect to the other brewers. So I had that experience at your place, and I think that there's something to be said for,
I'm really glad you did. I mean, my goal, so there's this personal rabid, relentless, insane quest. I want to catch this character. I want to do it. I want to figure it out. But the other part of it is like, well, that's personally what I want to do is like someone who makes something. But what we want to do, like hospitality, or like the reason we have a brewery, the reason we have our cafe is I've been really lucky. We have gotten to experience these other things in other places. Like, right? I've gotten to have like fresh beer poured from the Gravity keg that is just so full of character, and I want to share. I want to share that experience with people, right? Like, hey, you haven't had this thing before. You haven't like walked into a place and they're like, oh, it's like, not to sound like the Olive Garden, but when you're here, your family, like, oh, we're so glad you're here. Let us get you a glass. Like, be comfortable and have it. I want to share that with people because I won't ever get the details right, but I want people to have the experience that I've been able to have. And so that's, and every once in a while, it seems like, I don't know, I meet someone like you who says, oh yeah, I had that. So that feels good.
Yeah.
But that's what we're trying to do every day.
I talk to my team all the time and the friends as well sometimes about it, and I'm like, and it's only generally other brewers that kind of understand this sometimes, which is kind of what you were alluding to. Just because I feel like I haven't necessarily accomplished, like Hellas, for example, right? I'm trying to make I know what character and what experience I'm trying to create. And just because I feel like I haven't hit that, it does not mean it's not a phenomenal beer that we're making, right? It's an incredible beer. It's great. You know, people are definitely going to enjoy it and have great experience with it. But it still doesn't mean that I've necessarily gotten exactly where I want with it.
Yeah.
That's a personal thing, though, you know?
I'm curious, how do you deal with that disappointment?
You just don't sleep.
I'm not the only one. That's good.
You just take it out on yourself, emotionally and physically.
It's so good to be in your company.
Ben and I have gone over this a couple times, and you know, my advice to him is stop beating yourself up. You know,
it's easy.
And my cow
Get
comment
over it. Yeah.
was, you know, the brewery that he worked at in outside of Bamberg, you know, it smells like manure. Like the whole town is, you know, a farming town, and it's a joke, but you know, put some cows in the back of your brewery and have some manure smells, and maybe you'll hit your goal.
Maybe that's it. Yeah, we'll see.
How important is it, one, for festivals like this to exist, but then two, for you as smaller brewers and the others in this room to continue on with small batch lagers, right? You look at the overall beer numbers these days, and up, down, whatever, the majority of beer drinkers are still going for, you know, those big major brands that are out there. That's still 88% of the overall marketplace these days.
Craft or industrial?
Industrial is
beer
like
as a whole.
Yeah, beer as a whole. So 88%, 87% is all, you know, Bud Miller Coors kind of thing, and their subsidiaries and that kind of thing. And then in the craft space, I mean, lager is still, of the 13% of the craft space, lager is still very small in all of that. But how important is it for lager breweries in the craft space to continue to make the beers that you guys are making? Because I feel like otherwise you might just sort of cede that ground to the larger producers and maybe never be able to get it back.
I think it's important for anybody with a passion to do what they're passionate about. And so I don't necessarily, like, the short answer is it's very important for people to do this. And that's because the people that are in this room and people like Khris here at Notch, who is, you know, our gracious host today, he cares so much about this thing. And the only reason this exists as a festival is because he loves it. Like he loves this thing, so he's bringing it to the people that are his neighbors.
Yeah.
That's what everyone should do. Whether it's lager, whether it's mixed culture beer, whether it's, you know, IPA for that matter. I think people should just do the thing they care about, because if you care about it enough, what you're going to make is going to be good. And you just have to, like, as long as that's the focus, is making something phenomenal that you care about, you're going to make really, really awesome things, and people are going to be able to taste that passion and experience that. And so, yeah, it's super important for people that care about this to be here, to make the beers they make, and to share it with their community.
Tom?
Tradition. Khris is absolutely a traditionalist, and you know, we just worked on this project with pitch line barrels, and you know, 150 years ago, all beer was aged in pitch lined wooden tanks, and it's great that Khris wants to bring that tradition back.
Yeah.
And you know, it was top secret. He's He told me that I couldn't tell anybody, and next thing I know, he's posting it on Facebook.
Yeah,
But
yeah. He's giving your numbers to reporters. Yeah, it's,
whatever.
Yeah,
whatever. I think it's great, and the more of a traditional aspect of producing this lager beer, the better. Opens people's eyes.
cool. Ben.
So I drink a lot of Coors Banquet. I love that beer.
Sure.
And it's so easy to drink. Like, and then there's small batch lager, and not all of them are great. Some of them are world class. Like, there's a lineup of world class small batch lagers here. And to me, like, the biggest difference is like, God, they have so much expression. They have so much personality. There's so much going on in those beers. One is not just like the one next to it. And I don't mean that they're inconsistent, but like, Tom's beer is not my beer, is not Chris's beer, like, and we're all making Hellas, but they have such different expression to them. I love that. The world is, anything that you can look at in the world, art, music, like, it's so much more interesting that there's lots of people doing different things. And that's, to me, like, okay, this is the style of beer I want to drink. And so I'm glad that there are other people who are making the type of beer I want to drink in ways that are different than mine. Because, I love Coors Banquet, but I don't want to drink it every day for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I want to drink Chris's and Tom's.
All right, so before I let you guys go to refill your glasses, you talked about travels throughout Europe, travels throughout the world, drinking lagers. What is a quintessential lager experience that the general drinker, somebody like me who doesn't, can't get into the cellars, or an audience with a brewmaster, what is the quintessential overseas lager experience for the everyday drinker that you would encourage somebody to go and do, Khris?
Overseas specifically?
Yeah.
Europe specifically?
I mean, sure.
Okay. I think as simple as you can make it would be, like I said, going to Augustiner Keller and crushing Augustiner. I mean, another one that comes to mind is getting the tour at Pilsner Quell in Pilsen. Like, and that's an incredible experience. And so those two are probably the really impressive lager experiences. Going to Ondex.
Yeah.
Like making the trek up to the monastery. Like, those are incredible experiences around lager.
Did I box you in with would you have a U.S. or?
No, you didn't box me. I mean, yeah, you did. You put me in the corner. You put me in the corner.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I was trying to rope-a-dope you for a little bit, but it didn't work out. What I was going to say is there are some incredible places to have experiences. Notch is one of them. You know what I mean? Like this is like going to Salem, going here, sitting in that beer garden, drinking beer. All these breweries that are here, a lot of them have great experiences. I think like one of the best beer gardens I've ever been to in my life is Hercules in Querétaro, Mexico, and they make incredible lager as well, and that's an incredible lager experience. But they're trying to make European style beers, so like there are places where you can go and like have an incredible lager experience. And usually, like what you just said, Ben, earlier, like it's usually people that are creating that experience because they were inspired by a previous experience. They're trying to bring that to the people that they live with, right? Like your community. You're trying to bring them an experience that impressed you, you know, that you wish you could have every day. And so that's where you should go.
Cool. Ben, what's the achievable lager experience that you would encourage people to go and try to have?
Well, I don't want to steal this from Tom, but go to Bamberg. Go to Bamberg and just wander around. Just go into random places, or go to any of the
Can
breweries.
confirm.
Go there, and you will have beer that blows your mind and how different it is than what you expect it to be. And you will have a service and hospitality experience that is radically different. You'll meet people who, there's a room over here. Like, where are you from? Like, to me, that's it. Go to Bamberg.
Tom?
I agree with Ben 100%. The segment that we haven't talked about is the beer garden.
Yeah.
So, if you're at Augustiner Keller in Munich or Ondex, you share a table with somebody. In America, we want to have the table to ourselves. And, that Notch is a perfect example of breaking that tradition where you sit next to somebody and you just start having a conversation with them over a glass of really good beer. And, they don't have cooties. It's like, get close to somebody and just strike up a conversation with a stranger, because you never know what you're going to find out. And I found out some, similarities. You might be related to somebody, or they know somebody that you know. I mean, that whole degree of separation is
6 degrees,
So That's my.
It's like the most beautiful experience.
It
doing
is.
that,
It really
you know?
is.
It is.
Yeah, no, a proper beer garden experience it's something special. It's really great.
I kind of force people in my beer garden to sit with other people, and I just say, hey, sit with these people because you never know what you're going to find out.
I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not the forcing thing.
Well, I was
maybe
the wrong,
gently encourage.
That was the wrong word, but
do it. Sit here.
Yeah, sit here
And this
or
is
else.
what you're drinking. Guys, thanks for doing this. Tom, Ben, Khris, I appreciate your time here on this panel. Everybody is thirsty to get back out there. Thanks again to Khris Loring, the entire Notch team, all the brewers who are here, and all of you for listening, both here in the room and at home. And stay tuned because Andy Crouch is coming up in just a little bit. Everybody here in the room.
Who?
Exactly. Yeah, it's the real brains behind All About Beer. The reason that we're still in business. Mr. Andy Crouch himself will be doing a New England panel in just about 30 minutes time. So come back then. But thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Guys.
Thanks, John. Thanks, All About Beer. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Our
you.
thanks to Notch Brewing for having All About Beer as a media partner. Next week, my colleague Andy Crouch steps into the host spot as he hosts a trio of New England brewers to talk about the evolution of the region's beer scene. Questions, comments, guest suggestions, you can do all of that by emailing me. It's John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. A reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com. You can also check out the podcast page, the merch page, and read great new content, as well as the archives going all the way back to 1979. Follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. All About Beer has a podcast channel. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And don't forget, go check out probrewer.com each week for original articles from the All About Beer team. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.